Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about one of the biggest mysteries in relationships. Why does he stay silent when he's thinking about you every second of the day? Why does he crave you but never act on it? The answer isn't what you think. See, the human brain is wired for two things, survival and connection. But the problem? Fear often overpowers desire. You know that guy who vanishes but still watches your stories? Who doesn't text but lingers in your mind? It's not because he doesn't want you. It's because something inside him is stopping him. Of rejection and vulnerability. We all crave love, but we fear rejection even more. When a man desires you deeply, the stakes feel high. If he reaches out and you don't respond the way he hopes, that's a direct hit to his identity. So what does he do? He avoids the pain by avoiding you. But make no mistake, he still thinks about you every single day. Ego and masculine conditioning. Let's be real. Men are conditioned to be strong, to not need someone, to always be in control. So when he feels an overwhelming craving for you, his brain fights against it. He convinces himself, I'll just wait. If she wants me, she'll come to me. His pride stops him from acting on what his heart truly wants. Unresolved trauma and past experiences. Maybe he's been hurt before. Maybe he's opened up and been left shattered. And now he's built a wall so high that even his own feelings can't break through. He wants to reach out, but his past whispers, remember what happened last time, and that stops him in his tracks. The scarcity versus abundance mindset. Here's something powerful. People with a scarcity mindset hesitate. They believe they have limited chances, and if they make one wrong move, it's game over. Instead of taking action, they stay stuck in their head, overanalyzing. And when it comes to you, he's scared of losing you more than he's excited to gain you. Lack of self-worth and confidence. Now here's a truth bomb. Sometimes it's not you, it's him. If he doesn't feel worthy of you, if he doubts he can meet your standards, he'll sabotage himself before he even tries. He thinks, she's too good for me. Why would she want me? So instead of risking disappointment, he stays silent. The push-pull of desire and fear. Desire pulls him towards you, fear pushes him away, and he's stuck in the middle. His mind is a battlefield between I need her and I can't afford to be vulnerable. Every time he picks up the phone to text you, fear whispers, don't do it, and the cycle continues. So, what's the lesson here? You're not crazy for feeling his energy. You're not imagining his desire, but he has to break his own barriers. You can't force him to act. The best thing you can do, keep shining, keep being your best self, and don't chase someone who's stuck in his own fears. Because the man who truly wants you, he'll fight through all of it, he'll push past the fear. And when he does, that's when you'll know he's ready for the kind of love that lasts. Step up, own your worth, and never settle for anything less than someone who's willing to fight for you. Now go out there and be unstoppable. Fear of rejection is one of the most powerful emotions we experience as human beings. It's an instinctive response rooted deep within us, connected to our survival mechanisms. Our ancestors feared rejection because it meant being cast out of the group, being left alone in a dangerous world. In modern life, that fear manifests in all kinds of ways, especially in relationships. When a man deeply desires someone, the thought of rejection becomes amplified. The vulnerability that comes with putting himself out there, putting his emotions on the line, is something many people, men in particular, will shy away from. Imagine being so drawn to someone your heart races at the thought of them, but then the mind steps in. The mind begins to rationalize everything that could go wrong. What if she doesn't feel the same way? What if she turns me down? What if I say something wrong and ruin everything? These thoughts flood the mind, overwhelming the desire to connect with fear of the consequences. The idea of rejection feels like an emotional wound that could take a long time to heal. In the case of a man who is craving someone but refuses to reach out, he may experience this battle daily. He craves the connection. He longs for it with every part of his being. Yet that fear of rejection is so strong that he can't take action. His desire to protect himself from emotional pain outweighs his urge to reach out to you. Every time he picks up his phone, his thumb hovers over the keyboard, but he doesn't want to face the sting of silence or rejection. The moment he feels exposed, vulnerable, it's as if his emotional walls immediately go up. That wall is not there to keep you out, it's there to protect him. It's a coping mechanism, a learned behavior over years of exposure to rejection, hurt, or disappointment. Even if he knows deep down that he wants a connection with you, the prospect of being rejected makes him hesitate. Rejection in his mind would mean confirmation of his worst fear, that he's not enough or not worthy of your love and attention. He might even start to question his own value. He may feel inadequate, unworthy of someone as amazing as you. These negative beliefs about himself will keep him stuck in a cycle of inaction. But here's the interesting part. This fear of rejection doesn't just come from a logical place. It's deeply tied to his emotional state. It's as if his body goes into fight or flight mode when faced with potential rejection. Instead of embracing the vulnerability that comes with reaching out, he retreats into safety. The human brain doesn't like uncertainty, and when emotions are involved, the stakes feel so much higher. The heart says, go for it, but the mind says, no, don't risk it. This fear can be so overpowering that even though he's consumed by thoughts of you, he might choose to stay silent. He might not call, not text, not express what he's feeling, because doing so might feel like stepping onto a battlefield without any armor. It feels easier to leave things unsaid than risk having his feelings unreciprocated or dismissed. In his mind, silence is safer. Silence means he can preserve his dignity, his pride, his sense of control. He doesn't have to face the possibility of vulnerability. He can continue to yearn for you from a distance, wrapped in the comfort of imagined possibilities rather than confronting the painful reality of rejection. But here's the kicker. Even though he stays silent, the craving doesn't go away. It only builds. The desire only deepens. But he doesn't know how to bridge the gap between wanting to connect and actually taking the step to do so. It's an exhausting cycle of desire and fear. And until he faces this fear head on, until he overcomes the belief that rejection equals personal failure, he will remain stuck in that space of longing but silence. The truth is, this fear is universal. Everyone at some point has held back out of fear of rejection, fear of emotional exposure. But when we understand that vulnerability is the path to connection, that's when we can break free of this fear. It's about leaning into the discomfort, trusting that rejection is not a reflection of our worth, but simply a part of the human experience. There's a powerful force play in many men's lives, society's expectations around masculinity. From a young age, boys are taught to be tough, to not show emotions, to act as though they have everything under control. They are told to be independent, to not appear needy or vulnerable, and certainly not to express emotional dependency. This societal conditioning can have a profound effect on a man's ability to connect authentically with others, particularly when it comes to relationships. When a man deeply desires someone, there's an inherent tension between what he feels and what he believes he should express. The desire to reach out is real, the yearning to connect is genuine, but his conditioning makes it hard for him to show it. If he's grown up with the belief that real men don't need anyone, the mere act of reaching out may feel like a betrayal of that belief. To him, needing someone feels like weakness. To want someone to express that vulnerability challenges the notion of invulnerability he's spent years cultivating. He may genuinely crave your attention, your presence, your connection, but he struggles with the idea of showing that need. It feels like a loss of power, a loss of control. This is where the ego steps in, creating a false narrative. The ego whispers, you need to stay strong. Don't show her that you care too much or you'll lose respect. This internal dialogue creates an emotional barrier, making it harder to express what's really going on inside. Men are often taught to be the pursuers, not the pursued. There's an unspoken rule in society that men should always be the ones to initiate, to lead the interaction, to be the ones in control of their emotions. This means that even though a man may crave your attention, he will hold back, waiting for the right moment or for you to make the first move. Why? Because it's easier for him to maintain his image of strength and autonomy if he doesn't show vulnerability first. If he reaches out and you don't respond the way he hopes, it could feel like a hit to his self-promotion. If he shows need, he risks losing his identity as someone who's got it all together. This fear of appearing weak doesn't just come from external sources. It's reinforced internally. Many men are so deeply embedded in this idea of emotional restraint that they don't even realize it's impacting their behavior. They might be unaware that their need for control and strength is actually preventing them from experiencing the emotional intimacy they crave. The deeper they internalize these beliefs, the harder it becomes for them to open up emotionally, even when they desperately want to. And yet beneath the tough exterior, beneath the facade of control, there's a human being longing for connection. He wants to reach out, he wants to be vulnerable, but the fear of losing that emotional power, the fear of appearing weak, keeps him frozen in place. This push and pull between desire and pride is a constant internal struggle. The need to show he's in control conflicts with the natural human desire to be seen, understood, and loved. Over time, this conditioning can lead to emotional disconnection. If a man suppresses his feelings for too long, he might begin to believe that showing vulnerability is just not worth it. He might convince himself that it's easier to hold everything inside to avoid the potential pain of emotional exposure. But the reality is, this only isolates him. The more he suppresses his emotions, the harder it becomes for him to connect with others on a meaningful level. The irony is that the very thing he fears, appearing weak, is actually the key to deeper, more authentic relationships. It's important to understand that this behavior isn't about a lack of interest or desire. It's not that he doesn't want to connect. It's that his internalized beliefs about masculinity are holding him back. Until he can reconcile the need for emotional expression with his sense of self, he will remain stuck in this pattern. This is where real transformation happens. When a man begins to understand that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. When he can accept that needing someone, asking for help, or expressing his feelings does not make him any less of a man, it makes him human. The moment he breaks free from this toxic idea of emotional self-reliance, he opens the door to deeper, more meaningful connections. And in that space, true intimacy can flourish. Unresolved trauma and past experiences have a deep and often invisible impact on how a person behaves in relationships, particularly when it comes to emotional vulnerability. For many people, especially men, past wounds are carried like invisible baggage. These experiences, whether from childhood, past relationships, or difficult life events, shape the way they interact with others and influence their ability to open up emotionally. In the case of a man who deeply craves someone, but is hesitant to reach out, past trauma can often be the root cause of his reluctance. When someone experiences emotional pain, whether it's heartbreak, rejection, betrayal, or abandonment, those experiences don't just vanish. They leave an imprint on the psyche. For a man, especially one who has been hurt before, the fear of history repeating itself is overwhelming. He may have loved deeply in the past only to be let down, neglected, or even manipulated. This pain becomes a protective mechanism. The next time he feels something similar, whether it's for you or someone else, he might pull back before he allows himself to fully engage. His mind replays the past, reminding him of the hurt he experienced, and that internal dialogue becomes a barrier to emotional openness. This fear of repeating past mistakes can make him hesitant to take risks in new relationships. He might crave you and want to connect with you, but the specter of past wounds looms large in his mind. The thought of opening up to you, of expressing his feelings, could trigger the memory of how things went wrong before. This is often compounded by the belief that if he shows vulnerability again, he'll get hurt once more. So instead of risking the same heartbreak, he chooses to remain silent. He withdraws into himself, afraid to take a step forward because the potential pain is just too great. What often happens, though, is that this trauma becomes a cycle. The fear of vulnerability leads to emotional distance, and emotional distance creates a lack of connection. The more he withholds, the more he convinces himself that relationships are unsafe, that they lead to pain and rejection. He may not consciously realize it, but the unhealed wounds from his past are controlling his present behavior, preventing him from moving forward. If you felt that way through trauma and then you had to enter a relationship with somebody that 2 minutes later was able to communicate, this isn't a deliberate choice to push you away. It's a defense mechanism designed to protect him from the very thing he desires most. But there's also an additional layer to this issue, the concept of self-worth. If a man has been hurt in the past, he might start to internalize the belief that he isn't worthy of love or connection. He may wonder if he will ever find someone who truly understands him, or if his past failures in relationships mean that he's fundamentally flawed. This deep-seated feeling of inadequacy can make it even harder for him to reach out. He's afraid that you'll see him as broken, that you'll judge him for his past mistakes or emotional scars. So rather than risk facing this potential judgment, he stays quiet, retreating further into himself. The key thing to understand here is that these unresolved traumas are not intentional or manipulative. They are coping mechanisms that a person has developed over time in response to emotional pain. In his mind, staying silent and avoiding vulnerability feels like a way to protect himself from further harm. Yet this defense mechanism only perpetuates the cycle of emotional isolation and self-protection. And so this quote, when I listen back over the last couple of years, the more he suppresses his feelings, the more entrenched the trauma becomes, and the harder it is to break free. Healing from past wounds requires self-awareness and a willingness to face those uncomfortable feelings. It requires a man to confront his fears head-on, to understand that just because he's been hurt before doesn't mean it will happen again. He needs to learn that vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but a gateway to deeper connection and personal growth. When he's able to process his past trauma and come to terms with it, he can move forward with greater emotional freedom. He can reach out, express his feelings, and ultimately build a healthier, more fulfilling connection with you and with himself. Ultimately, the challenge lies in overcoming the fear that past pain will define future relationships. As difficult as it may be, the key is for him to recognize that healing is possible, and it's through vulnerability and emotional openness that true intimacy can flourish. But until he addresses those unhealed wounds, he will continue to struggle with the very thing he wants most, a genuine, unguarded connection. The scarcity mindset is a powerful force that can shape a person's actions and decisions, especially in the realm of relationships. When someone operates from a mindset of scarcity, they believe that resources, whether love, attention, or emotional connection, are limited. This belief often stems from past experiences, fears of loss, or even societal conditioning that tells us that there's not enough to go around. In relationships, this manifests as a belief that if they don't act quickly or assertively, they might lose the opportunity. They may think that if they don't seize the moment, someone else will take their place, or that this is their one shot at something meaningful. The scarcity mindset leads to a sense of desperation that often results in the opposite of what they truly want: distance, indecision, and emotional walls. In the case of a man who desires someone but hesitates to contact them, the scarcity mindset can play a huge role in his reluctance to take action. He may feel that his opportunity with you is fleeting, and instead of acting with confidence, he becomes consumed by the fear that if he makes the wrong move, he'll lose everything. This fear can freeze him in place. He may tell himself, if I don't do this perfectly, she'll move on and I'll never have another chance. The pressure of needing to get it just right, of making sure that every text, every gesture, every word is perfect, becomes so overwhelming that he doesn't do anything at all. At the core of this mindset is the belief that there's a limited amount of love or opportunity to go around. This belief leads him to overanalyze every situation, every interaction, because he doesn't want to miss his one shot at creating something special. He may even convince himself that he has to play things cool, to hold back, to be less available or less vulnerable in order to make himself seem more valuable or rare. In his mind, this is a strategy to ensure that you'll see him as someone worth pursuing. But the irony is that this behavior often pushes the very person he desires away, as it communicates a lack of interest or emotional availability. What's fascinating about the scarcity mindset is that it's not only about relationships, it extends into other areas of life as well. People with the scarcity mindset often feel as though success, love, and happiness are things to be won or earned. They believe that there's only so much to go around, and if someone else has something, it means there's less for them. This sense of competition, rather than collaboration, is deeply ingrained in their thinking. And when it comes to love and connection, it can be incredibly detrimental. When a man operates from this mindset, he may find it hard to believe that there's more than enough love, affection, and connection in the world for everyone, especially for him. because he operates from a place of fear rather than abundance. He's constantly worried about losing the opportunity to connect with you. This leads him to hold back, to hesitate, to second guess his actions. He may think if I reach out too soon, she might think I'm too eager, too desperate, and that will make me unattractive. Instead of reaching out with genuine interest and curiosity, he retreats, believing that keeping his distance will somehow increase his value. But in reality, his silence only creates more space for uncertainty. And the longer he stays silent, the greater the chance he'll miss the opportunity altogether. An abundance mindset, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. It's the belief that there is more than enough love and connection to go around. People with an abundance mindset are comfortable with the idea that they don't need to control every interaction or every moment in order to create something meaningful. They trust that the right connections will come naturally, and that if someone is meant to be a part of their life, they don't have to force it. They can be themselves, express their feelings openly, and allow relationships to unfold organically. They don't feel the need to guard their emotions because they believe that love is not a limited resource. For the man who craves connection but holds back due to a scarcity mindset, the real challenge lies in shifting his belief system. Instead of viewing every interaction as a high-stakes game of win or lose, he needs to embrace the idea that there are infinite opportunities to connect, and that love and affection aren't things to be hoarded or rationed. When he can release this fear of loss and embrace the idea of abundance, he'll find that his actions come from a place of confidence and genuine desire, not fear or desperation. He'll reach out not because he's afraid of losing you, but because he genuinely wants to connect with you, knowing that the opportunity for love, growth, and connection is limited. The concept of emotional self-sufficiency is one that many people, particularly men, hold dear. It's the belief that one should be able to handle their emotions independently without relying on others for validation, support, or connection. On the surface, this might seem like a healthy mindset. After all, emotional independence is often equated with strength and resilience. However, when taken to an extreme, it can create barriers to deep emotional intimacy and prevent meaningful connections from forming. In the context of a man who craves someone but hesitates to contact them, emotional self-sufficiency can be a significant factor keeping him from taking action. At the heart of emotional self-sufficiency is the idea that needing someone is a sign of weakness. If he relies on someone else for emotional support or validation, it may feel to him like he's losing control or giving up his autonomy. For many men, especially those raised in environments that valued stoicism and self-reliance, the idea of depending on someone else, emotionally or otherwise, feels uncomfortable. They are conditioned to believe that the strongest, most capable individuals are those who can stand alone, who don't need anyone else to feel complete. This belief often prevents them from expressing vulnerability or reaching out when they are struggling emotionally. When this mindset is in place, it's easy for a man to bury his feelings and suppress his desires. Even though he may deeply crave emotional connection, especially with someone he cares about, he holds himself back because it feels like admitting a need for someone else is somehow a failure. Instead of reaching out, expressing affection, or showing vulnerability, he chooses to stay silent, believing that doing so would compromise his emotional independence. He might tell himself that he should be able to cope with his feelings on his own, that needing anyone else is a sign of weakness or lack of control. However, the truth is that emotional self-sufficiency, when overemphasized, can actually be counterproductive. While it's important to have emotional resilience and to be able to navigate difficult feelings independently, it's also crucial to recognize that relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, are built on mutual support and vulnerability. No one is meant to handle everything alone. Human beings are inherently social creatures, and the desire for emotional connection is a fundamental part of the human experience. When a man refuses to reach out or express his emotions because of an overblown sense of self-sufficiency, he cuts himself off from one of the most fulfilling aspects of life: deep, meaningful connection with others. This need for emotional independence can also lead to a sense of isolation. While he may be able to manage on his own in the short term, over time, the lack of emotional support and connection can take a toll. The more he withholds from others, the more emotionally distant he becomes, and the harder it is for him to open up in the future. He may even start to feel numb or disconnected from his own emotions, as if he's building walls around himself to protect against the vulnerability he fears. Moreover, emotional self-sufficiency can create a false sense of self-reliance. It often leads to the mistaken belief that needing someone is somehow lessening one's worth or ability to be strong. In reality, the ability to share emotions, to lean on others in times of need, is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. It takes courage to be vulnerable, to admit that you need someone else, and to show up authentically in relationships. When a man can embrace his emotional needs without shame, he opens himself up to the possibility of deeper connections and emotional fulfillment. For the man who desires connection but struggles to act on it, shifting the perspective around emotional self-sufficiency is crucial. He must recognize that emotional interdependence, being able to rely on others for support while also offering that support in return, is a natural, healthy part of life. Relationships thrive on this balance. By allowing himself to be vulnerable and expressing his emotions openly, he not only strengthens his bond with others, but he also affirms his own worth. He doesn't have to choose between emotional independence and connection. He can have both. Reaching out, showing affection, and admitting need are not signs of weakness, but of emotional strength and resilience. Ultimately, the challenge lies in releasing the belief that emotional self-sufficiency means never needing anyone. True emotional health comes from understanding that we can be both self-sufficient and interconnected, strong on our own while also capable of leaning on others when needed. The more a man is able to embrace this balance, the easier it becomes for him to reach out, express his feelings, and form meaningful, lasting connections. So, the fear of rejection is one of the most primal and deeply rooted emotions that influences human behavior. It taps into our need for belonging and acceptance, which are fundamental aspects of the human experience. For a man who craves connection but struggles to initiate contact, this fear of rejection can be a significant barrier. No one likes to feel rejected. It triggers feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and unworthiness. For many, especially those who place a high value on their self-promotion or sense of control, the fear of being rejected can feel unbearable. It can stop them from reaching out, from expressing their true feelings, and from taking risks in relationships, even when they deeply desire connection. When someone has experienced rejection in the past, whether it was in childhood, in a previous romantic relationship, or even in casual interactions, it can leave a lasting scar. These experiences form a mental block, a protection mechanism that tells the individual, if you reach out, you might be hurt again. The mind often associates the act of being vulnerable or expressing interest with potential pain. As a result, the instinct to withdraw and protect oneself from the possibility of rejection becomes automatic. This fear is not just about the external experience of being rejected, it's about the internal story that rejection reinforces, that they are not worthy of love, connection, or acceptance. This fear of rejection is especially strong in the early stages of a relationship when emotions are raw and the stakes feel high. A man who is deeply interested in someone may feel as though his entire self-worth is on the line with every message, every interaction. The fear that you might not reciprocate his feelings or that you might see him as unworthy can feel overwhelming. It's not just about the loss of a potential connection. It's about the potential loss of his own sense of value. The more he desires the connection, the greater the fear of rejection, because the more he invests emotionally, the more vulnerable he becomes. This can make him hesitant to reach out, to make the first move, or to express his feelings. The very act of making himself vulnerable and putting himself out there feels like a gamble, one that might result in humiliation, hurt, or a blow to his self-esteem. In many cases, the fear of rejection is magnified by perfectionism. The man may feel that if he doesn't act or present himself perfectly, he will be rejected outright. He may overthink every interaction, every word, and every gesture, trying to get it just right. This need for perfection often stems from a desire to avoid rejection at all costs. The fear is that if he's not enough, he will be dismissed, ignored, or abandoned. Instead of taking action and expressing his true feelings, he freezes, waiting for the perfect moment to make a move. But this perfectionism only leads to more anxiety and self-doubt, making it even harder for him to act. The key to overcoming this fear lies in reframing rejection as not a reflection of personal worth, but as a natural and inevitable part of life. Rejection is something that everyone experiences at some point, and it's not a judgment of who we are as individuals. In fact, some of the most successful and emotionally fulfilled people are those who have faced rejection, learned from it, and move forward with greater resilience and self-awareness. Rejection is often not personal, but simply a matter of timing, compatibility, or circumstances. Understanding that it is not a reflection of one's value or desirability can help reduce the emotional charge that rejection carries. Another important aspect of overcoming the fear of rejection is the ability to embrace vulnerability. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Rather, it is the key to building deeper, more authentic connections. When a man can step past the fear of rejection and allow himself to be vulnerable, he opens the door to true intimacy and emotional growth. Vulnerability is about showing up as your authentic self, without the armor of perfection or self-protection. It's about taking risks, knowing that the reward is not just the connection with another person, but the ability to grow emotionally and to learn from both the successes and the failures in relationships. For a man who desires someone but struggles to reach out, it's essential to recognize that his fear of rejection is a normal and human experience. The key is to acknowledge it without letting it control his actions. Reaching out, expressing feelings, and taking emotional risks are all part of the journey toward connection and growth. The more a man is able to embrace this vulnerability and face the fear of rejection head on, the more he will experience the fulfillment and joy that comes from building authentic relationships. By taking action in spite of the fear, he moves closer to the emotional intimacy he desires, and ultimately to a deeper understanding of himself and others. Understanding why a man who desperately craves connection might not reach out is essential to fostering compassion and empathy in our relationships. The reasons behind his silence are often deeply ingrained and complex, rooted in childhood experiences, past trauma, fear of rejection, emotional self-sufficiency, and a scarcity mindset. These factors don't reflect a lack of desire or interest, but rather internal struggles that shape his behavior in ways he may not fully understand. The key takeaway is that vulnerability and emotional openness are the building blocks of authentic connection. When we face the fears and insecurities that hold us back, whether it's the fear of being judged, rejected, or hurt, we can begin to break down the walls that keep us isolated. Embracing emotional vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a pathway to growth, intimacy, and stronger relationships. We must recognize that emotional connection is not a limited resource. There is enough love, understanding, and opportunity for everyone. It's only when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to let go of our need for perfection, and to face our fears that we can truly experience the connection we desire. For the man who struggles to act despite his deep desire, understanding and support from those around him can be the catalyst for change, helping him to step past his fears and take the emotional risks that lead to deeper, more fulfilling relationships.